April 20th, 1999. It started like any other school day at Columbine High School in Colorado. Students walked in, talking, laughing, planning their day. Nothing felt different, nothing felt wrong. But behind that normal morning, something had already been set in motion. A plan that wasn't just about violence, but something far bigger, something designed to leave a permanent mark. Within minutes, confusion would turn into panic, and panic into a nightmare no one inside those walls could escape. By the time it was over, lives were gone, and the world outside would never look at schools the same way again. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into what really led to that day. Long before April 20th, there were signs that something was building beneath the surface. Two students, Harris and Dylan Klebold, were not just ordinary teenagers. They shared a connection that slowly turned darker over time. Harris carried deep anger and wrote openly about harming others. On a private website he created in 1996, his posts shifted from simple game content to messages filled with hate. At one point he wrote, "All I want to do is kill and injure as many of you as I can." Klebold, on the other hand, showed a different side. His writings revealed sadness and isolation, often describing an infinite sadness and a desire to escape life. While one wanted control and destruction, the other struggled with despair. Together, that combination became dangerous. There were also early warning moments that stood out. In 1997, concerns about Harris's website were reported to authorities. A draft for a search warrant was even written, but it was never carried out. Months later, in January 1998, both were arrested for breaking into a van and stealing equipment. They were placed into a diversion program, attending anger management sessions, and were released early. On the surface, it looked like they had corrected their path. But behind closed doors, their thoughts were only getting darker, and what started as warning signs slowly turned into something far more disturbing. What makes this case even more chilling is that it wasn't impulsive. It was planned, carefully, slowly, and in detail for nearly a year. But the real shock is this. The shooting was never supposed to be the main event. Their original plan was a bombing that could have taken hundreds of lives in a single moment. In their journals, they both wrote about destruction, control, and leaving behind something unforgettable. Harris imagined attacks on a massive scale, even thinking about crashing an aircraft into a building. Klebold wrote about anger and revenge, describing moments where his wrath will be godlike. Then there were the tapes. Recorded in secret, they spoke directly to the camera, explaining what they were about to do and why. These became known as the basement tapes. Just before the attack, Harris left behind another recording, calmly saying, "It is less than 9 hours now," followed by, "People will die because of me, and it will be a day that will be remembered forever." This wasn't about a moment of anger. It was about creating something they believed the world would never forget. But a plan this big needed tools, and what they built next was terrifying. To turn their plan into reality, they built something far more complex than most people realized. This wasn't just about weapons, it was a full setup designed for maximum impact. In total, they created 99 explosive devices, including pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails, and propane-based bombs. The most important part of the plan sat inside the school cafeteria. 2 large propane bombs were placed in duffel bags, timed to go off during the busiest lunch period at 11:15 a.m. If those devices had worked as intended, nearly 488 students in the cafeteria could have been affected, and the blast might have collapsed the library above it. But it didn't stop there. They also prepared car bombs using propane tanks and gasoline. It meant to explode later and target emergency responders. On top of that, smaller bombs were placed in a field miles away as a diversion, hoping to pull firefighters away from the school. Alongside the explosives, they carried multiple firearms, including a carbine rifle, shotguns, and a semi-automatic handgun. These were hidden under trench coats, ready to be used if the bombs failed. Everything was calculated, every step had a purpose. And when the day finally came, everything was set in motion, but not everything went to plan. At exactly 11:19 a.m., everything began. 2 students, Rachel Scott and Richard Costaldo, were sitting outside near the west entrance, enjoying lunch like everyone else. Then, without warning, a pipe bomb was thrown. It didn't fully explode, only giving off smoke. Many nearby thought it was some kind of prank. Moments later, the situation turned real. Gunfire followed. Rachel Scott was struck and killed almost instantly, hit multiple times. Castaldo was also hit several times and left unable to move. What had looked like a joke seconds earlier had already become something far more serious. At the same time, more shots were fired towards students near the stairs. One student was killed, while others were injured trying to escape. Some still believed it wasn't real. The confusion slowed reactions, and those seconds mattered. Then came the turning point. The bombs placed earlier inside the school never went off. The entire plan shifted in that moment. Instead of waiting for explosions, they moved forward with direct attacks. In just minutes, what was meant to be one kind of attack turned into something else entirely, less predictable and just as dangerous. Within minutes, the chaos spread inside, and the school became a trap. As they moved inside through the west entrance, the situation changed fast. Hallways that were full just moments ago turned into places of confusion and fear. Shots echoed through the building, and pipe bombs were thrown into different areas, adding smoke and noise that made it even harder to understand what was happening. A teacher, Dave Sanders, immediately reacted. He began warning students and directing them away from danger. He's moving through the halls to help as many as he could. His actions gave several students a chance to escape or hide. But during this effort, he was hit and later collapsed in a classroom where students tried to keep him alive for hours. At 11:22 a.m., the first call for help reached the school resource officer. Within minutes, there was an exchange of gunfire outside the building. Around 60 yards away, shots were fired back and forth, but no one was hit during that moment. Inside, students were hiding under desks, inside rooms, or trying to run without knowing where safety was. Some doors were locked, others weren't. Every decision became critical. The building was no longer a place of learning. It had become unpredictable, loud, and impossible to read. But the worst part of this nightmare was still ahead. Inside one room. At 11:29 a.m., they entered the library. Inside were 52 students, along with teachers and staff, many already hiding under tables, hoping the danger would pass. It didn't. The room quickly became the center of the attack. Shots were fired almost immediately, hitting desks, walls, and people hiding beneath them. Some were targeted directly, others were struck while trying to stay silent and unseen. The atmosphere shifted from fear to complete terror within seconds. They moved through the library, reloading, shouting, and making it clear this was not random movement. It was controlled, deliberate. At one point they said, "Who's ready to die next?" Students stayed frozen, some pretending not to move at all. Others tried to help the injured even while still in danger. The noise of gunfire, breaking glass, and explosions filled the room, making it hard to tell where safety even was. In just a few minutes, the damage was severe. 10 people lost their lives in the library, and 12 others were injured. Then, just as suddenly as it began, they stopped and walked out at 11:36 a.m., leaving behind silence, confusion, and devastation. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. After leaving the library, they didn't stop. They moved back through the school, entering the science area and setting a fire inside a storage room. It was quickly put out, but it showed that the danger was still active. They continued walking through hallways, firing into empty rooms and ceilings as people stayed hidden, unsure if it was over. At 11:44 a.m., cameras captured them returning to the cafeteria. One of them fired toward the propane bombs, trying again to trigger an explosion that never came. A Molotov cocktail was thrown, briefly starting a fire, but the sprinkler system stopped it within minutes. They wandered again through the building, then made their way back to the library. By this point, most survivors had escaped or were unable to move. At 12:02 p.m., there was another exchange of gunfire through the windows, but no one was hit. Then, at 12:08 p.m., it ended. Both attackers took their own lives inside the library. Just like that, the sound stopped. No warning, no final message inside the school, just silence after chaos. Even after the sound stopped, the situation was far from under control. By 12 p.m., SWAT teams had surrounded the school, but entry was slow. It wasn't until 1:09 p.m. that teams began moving inside, carefully going room by room, unsure of what they might face. Outside, families gathered, waiting for answers that didn't come quickly. Inside, some victims were still alive, trying to hold on. At 2:38 p.m., one injured student managed to reach a library window and fell onto a rescue vehicle below, becoming known as the boy in the window. Another desperate moment came when a sign appeared in a window reading, "You're one bleeding to death," trying to guide help to a wounded teacher. But confusion and delays slowed everything down. By the next morning, the full impact became clear. 12 students and one teacher had lost their lives, with over 20 others injured. Later, the number of victims rose to 14 due to long-term injuries. What followed changed everything. Police tactics were redesigned, leading to faster response methods. Schools introduced stricter security, new rules, and constant vigilance. And beyond that, this event led to more than 70 copycat attacks, a lasting effect that still echoes today. Even after all these years, one thing still remains unclear: the true reason behind it all. There was planning, there were signs, there were moments where things could have changed, but they didn't. What happened that day left questions that still don't have clear answers. And maybe that's what makes it even more unsettling. So what do you think? Was this something that could have been stopped? Or was it already too far gone long before it began? Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you made it this far. Make sure to like, subscribe to watch more realer crimes stories like this. Thanks for watching. Stay aware.